Welcome back to Deck for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. Today we are building Bumi, and I went for more of a I'm going to kill you with all of my land style build instead of a specifically landfall style build. So we're playing a bunch of earthbending stuff instead of a bunch of landfall shenanigans, if that makes sense. So let's get right into it. After you guys click on that one link and claim your free $15. Additionally, you guys can get 10% off all of your Tolarian library proxies whenever you use code DT4D. I'm now sponsored with Baron of Dice. This means you guys can get 5% off whenever you guys use the code DT4D or click the link in the description down below. I'm a huge fan of the awesome art on their deck boxes and just the way they look in general, and you can pair up those awesome deck boxes with high quality playmats that match those deck boxes. Thank you, Baron of Dice, for sponsoring this channel. Now, let's read what Bumi does. Bumi is a 5 CMC commander, 3 generic, 1 green, 1 red. He has trample. When he enters, you get to Earthbend 4, so you get a 4/4 land. And then he says whenever he deals combat damage to a player, untap all lands you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Only land creatures can attack during that phase. So he's basically like sort of feast and famine in the command zone, even if we're not attacking people with our lands, which is extremely powerful. We're effectively getting to use our mana twice as much as our opponents just by having this guy in the command zone. And I think that's one of the most powerful parts of this guy. It's not double mana, but it is the mana you have available twice, which is kind of insane. And then once you animate all of those lands, you're able to beat your opponents to death with them. So let's get right into how we built this guy. There is a lot of cards that are just absolutely disgusting with him that I want to talk about at the end of the video, but I thought they were kind of so powerful it kind of made the deck unfun in a way for me, so I didn't include them in my build. So we're going to go over my build, but I do have some treats for you at the end of the video that just absolutely break this guy. The first thing I'm super excited to play is Liege of the Tangle. This is a card that I've been wanting to put in a deck for a long time, but the card's just so awkward, it's hard to justify putting it in a deck. This is an 8 CMC creature. He has trample, and whenever Liege of the Tangle deals combat damage to a player, you may choose any number of target lands you control and put an awakening counter on each of them. Each of those lands is an 8/8 green elemental creature. For as long as it has an awakening counter on it, they're still lands. So now we can connect with Liege of the Tangle, animate all of our lands. Bumi is going to untap all of our lands, and now all of those lands can attack. That's going to be a board of 8/8s that's just going to get to hit our opponents in the face. So again, super excited we can finally find a place for this guy. I'm going to enjoy winning with him. Kodama of the West Tree also just seemed like a no-brainer. This is kind of like a modified creature deck since all of our animated lands are going to have 1/1 counters on them. And then he says whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So now we're ramping whenever we deal damage with our lands, and additionally he gives all of our modified lands trample at the same time. So pretty cool. Makes it easier for them to connect, and then whenever they connect we get more bodies on the battlefield in the form of lands. Spring Heart Nantuko is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It says whenever land enters the battlefield, you essentially get to create a token copy of the thing it's enchanting, and then it is able to be bestowed onto a creature. What you're going to do is you're going to bestow it on any creature with Earthbending. Even our commander is fine. And then once you do that, every time a land enters the battlefield, you pay 2 mana and you can Earthbend that land immediately. If we pair this with our Lotus Cobra effects, we are able to generate 2 mana with this pretty consistently. And then once we do that, we're able to easily Earthbend for free every single time a land enters the battlefield. I did also want to mention we are on Nissa, which is basically the Lotus Cobra that allows you to kind of tutor up an elemental. And then Liege of the Tangle is in the deck. So basically, 2 lands into the battlefield, you're just going to get Liege of the Tangle, and then next turn you're going to do some disgusting things. Awaken the Woods. This is X and then 2 green CMC. It's a sorcery that says create X green forest dryad land creature tokens. So now we just get more lands to untap and a board state of lands that are ready to attack our opponents. A really cool card that I like in this deck is Dryad class. You can level it up, and once you level it up, you're able to play additional lands. But once you hit level 3, it animates one of your lands and makes it to where its power is going to be equal to the amount of lands you control. What's really cool about this is we are actually utilizing the Earthbending ability in this deck to sacrifice our creatures to our greater good effects, or effects that let you sacrifice creatures to draw cards equal to a creature's power. So we put a lot of counters on our lands, sacrifice them, draw a ton of cards. Super fun because since it's Earthbended, the land just comes back and triggers all of your landfall effects again. Kind of a win-win in a way. Bristly Bill seemed like a no-brainer since the majority of our lands, or basically all of our lands, are going to have counters on them. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a 1/1 counter on target creature, and then for 5 mana, you get to double the number of counters on each creature you control. Now, we've got some cool synergy here with Bristly Bill. We have a little bit of a Vigilance style to this deck. This means we can attack with all of our land creatures, tap our land creatures for mana, double all of their counters, and then hit like an absolute truck. Since Bumi is our commander, it's also just not awkward at all to tap 5 of your lands, double the counters, connect with Bumi, untap those lands, and then attack with your lands. So there's a lot of flexibility you can have to this deck once you add Vigilance into the mix, and then again, Bumi just untaps them anyway. So Bristly Bill makes a lot of sense here, and he's going to make your lands absolutely massive. Scyther Cap Cub is also insane. It says whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved, double the number of 1/1 counters on that creature instead. Again, we kind of went with a 1/1 counter sub-theme just because all of our lands are going to have counters on them. Kamal, Heart of Krosa, also especially broken in this deck because he's an 8 CMC creature that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. Now, that's at the beginning of combat, and since we're always going to have 2 combats, he's basically going to give them +3, they hit, and then he's going to give them another +3, and now they'll have +6. So essentially, he's going to make it to where all of your creatures, especially your lands, are dealing 9 additional damage to your opponents. It's not going to be okay. Plus, he gives them trample, and for 2 mana, we can animate lands. They're going to become elemental creatures with indestructible and haste. So we don't really have to have any earthbending lands on the battlefield to make this synergy super broken. Alright guys, let's get into the earthbending portion of this deck tech. Badger Mole Cub essentially doubles all of our mana. Now in a normal deck, he doesn't do that, but what he does do is he enters the battlefield, earthbends, and whenever you tap a creature for mana, you add an additional green. Since the majority of our lands, or the goal is to get all of our lands earthbended, it's for all intents and purposes essentially doubling our mana, and then whenever you have Bumi untapping all of our lands every single turn, it's kind of quadrupling our mana, and you kind of just need card advantage at that point, and that's kind of why we're leaning on power matter strategies to draw a ton of cards since our creatures are going to be so big. Moving on to other earthbending creatures, we have Avatar Kyoshi, Earthbender, 8 CMC. During your turn, Avatar Kyoshi has hexproof, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, earthbend 8 and then untap that land. Very, very good here because, again, we're getting 2 combats. So she's going to be able to add 16 power to the board every single combat. That's kind of insane. We're also including the other Bumi into the deck. He's 5 CMC. He says whenever he enters the battlefield, you earthbend 1, and then whenever Bumi attacks, you get to put 2 1/1 counters on each land you control. So he's just going to buff up our lands once we start earthbending all of them. The Boulder, Ready to Rumble. This guy's another way to solidly earthbend at combat, which is pretty good. He's not going to get double combat since only lands attack for the second one, but still really good here. Whenever the Boulder attacks, you get to earthbend X, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater, and then he has power 4 along with our commander. So on the basis, and our commander enters in earthbends 4. So that's minimum 3, assuming we have the earthbending creature from our commander, and then him. So he's already earthbending 3. We just need 1 other 4/4 on the battlefield, and then we're creating 4/4 earthbended lands. This means every single combat step that this guy is able to attack, we're adding another 4/4 onto the battlefield, so he's going to progressively make bigger and bigger man lands. Toph Earthbending Master is a 4 CMC legendary creature. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get an experience counter on it, and then whenever you attack, earthbend X, where X is the number of experience counters you have. This is really good because it has the wording whenever you attack, not whenever she specifically attacks. That means we're going to be able to trigger this 2 times per turn, so she's earthbending twice per turn, and you're going to progressively earthbend more and more. We're also playing Toph Greatest Earthbender. Whenever she enters the battlefield, you get to earthbend X, where's the amount of mana we spent to cast her, which is going to be, again, 4. And then land creatures you control have double strike, which is absolutely going to be insane. It's going to really help just end out the game. We're also on, again, another Toph. When this one enters the battlefield, you can discard a card. If you do, you get a return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. Additionally, whenever you cast a spell, Earthbend 1. If that spell was a lesson, you get to put an additional counter on it, but really all we're worried about is Earthbending whenever we're casting spells, and these cards combined are going to allow us to pretty consistently Earthbend the majority of the lands we have on the battlefield. Now, something that was important to me was that our lands had Vigilance, because it sucks that we're only utilizing the damage from our lands. I still want to cast spells, so I wanted to be able to utilize the fact that our commander was essentially Sword of Feast and Famine in the command zone, and additionally, I wanted to hit people with massive lands, and the best way to do that is Vigilance, so now our lands don't tap whenever we attack. Red is going to be amazing because he says Vigilance, Trample. Other modified creatures you control have Vigilance and Trample. And remember, whenever we're animating those lands by Earthbending, they're always going to have 1/1 counters on them, so they are always going to be modified. So now not only do they have Vigilance, they also have Trample. Ragadraga is kind of Vigilance in a roundabout way. He says each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2, so that's good just for the ending out the game with combat damage portion of the deck. And then whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, you get to untap it. And then it also says whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7 until end of turn and gains Trample. Now that's not super relevant. There are some 7 drops and 8 drops in the deck, so we can trigger that, but really what we care about is the fact that it's giving all of our lands +2/+2 and essentially giving all of our lands Vigilance at the same time. Glacial Godma, a 7 CMC creature that has Trample, and whenever it enters, you get to create a lander token. It also says whenever a land you control enters, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain Vigilance and haste until end of turn. So this is another solid way we can not only buff our board state, but additionally give all of our lands Vigilance. Now, this goes without saying, but the majority of our card advantage is going to lean on the fact that we're playing very, very big creatures. And since we get to play very big creatures, we get to play cards like Greater Good, we get to play Disciple of Freelease, Last March of the Ints. This one's really cool. It's 8 CMC. Draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control, then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Absolutely broken. But if we're not utilizing those effects to draw cards, what we are going to use is our Orin Frostfang effects. Cards that allow us to draw cards whenever our creatures deal combat damage. Dragonborn Champion is the least effective out of all of these, but he still does allow us to draw cards whenever a source you control deals 5 or more damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So essentially, as long as we're hitting people with 5/5s, we are drawing cards as if this guy was Toski. And again, Toski is another card in the deck that allows you to draw cards whenever a creature deals combat damage to a player. I did also just want to mention briefly, since Orin Frostfang is in the deck and there are other things in the deck that give our creatures Trample, whenever you combine Death Touch and Trample, the wording gets really cool and really weird at the same time. Trample just needs you to assign lethal damage to start trampling over damage. So usually that means when a 3/3 blocks a 1/1, 2 damage is going to trample over. But lethal damage is really important wording here because Death Touch makes it to where 1 is lethal. So if a 5/5 gets blocked by a 10/10, if the 10/10 has Death Touch and Trample, you can actually trample over all 9 damage because you only need 1 damage to deal lethal. A lot of people know it, the newer players don't, and it's just one of the most fun things you can do. Sword of Hearthenholm also seemed pretty solid in this deck. Whenever it connects, you not only get to blink a creature, but additionally, you get to find a land and put it straight onto the battlefield, so it's going to trigger landfall effects, and we can blink our commander, meaning we can go ahead and Earthbend that land at the same time. Just seemed like a no-brainer to me. Another thing we're adding to the deck is extra combat steps. We have Overpowering Attack, Seize the Day, because really all we need to do is untap our commander, and Seize the Day says, untap target creature after this main phase, there's an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase, and then it has flashback. So yes, you only get to untap 1 creature, but we're untapping our commander. Our commander is dealing combat damage, and then additionally he's untapping our lands, and then our lands can additionally go into combat also. Another thing that's really important is since this deck has a Vigilance strategy tied into it, you still do get the combat step even if you don't have to untap your creatures, right? So normally the downside of Seize the Day is you don't get to untap all of your other creatures, but if all of your other creatures have Vigilance, they're already untapped. So you can kind of utilize Seize the Day and not have the downside because of the Vigilance sub-theme. We're also playing Morag. Morag has some cool text. He's 6 CMC but kind of broken. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it's attacked this turn. So our lands are going to basically get +2, which is pretty good. And then it says whenever land you control enters, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of those combat phases, untap all creatures you control. Really good here. Again, we're just adding extra combats to the deck, and basically for any extra combat you get, it's kind of 2 extra combat steps for your lands since Bumi is our commander. So any extra combat step in this deck, you're kind of getting double value out of. Last but not least, I will talk about Beastmaster's Ascension and Nature's Will before we get into the broken cards that I didn't add into the deck. Beastmaster's Ascension is a 3 CMC enchantment. It says whenever a creature you control attacks, you get to put a quest counter on Beastmaster's Ascension, and as long as Beastmaster's Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. So it's kind of a fair Craterhoof behemoth that takes a little bit to wind up, but once it gets wound up, it just doesn't go away, and our lands are going to be massive. Nature's Will says whenever one or more creatures you control deals combat damage to a player, tap all lands that player controls and untap all lands you control. It's just another way we can untap our lands by going to combat, because honestly, I just do not want to have to be forced to attack with my lands and then not be able to use my lands to cast spells. Now let's talk about the cards that I thought were too powerful to include in this deck. The first card we have is Ashaya Soul of the Wilds, which is one of the first cards I went for because I was like, I want all of my creatures to get access to that additional combat step. So if we turn all of our creatures into lands, we get to utilize both of those extra combat steps. The problem is it's a little bit too broken because if you turn Bumi into a land, that's going to allow Bumi to attack for that additional combat step as well. And once Bumi can attack for that additional combat step, you're just going to get infinite additional combat steps because he's going to keep giving you an extra combat step when he connects, and he's going to give it to the lands, and now he's a land. So it ended up being one of those cards that I went for right away, and then I was like, wait, this is just too disgusting. It's a 1-card combo with your commander, right? So I went ahead, put it in the sideboard, shared it with you guys, and now, you know, I don't have to be guilty if you guys play it. Aggravated Assault is another one that's absolutely broken in this deck. It's a 3 CMC enchantment, and for 5 mana, you get to untap all creatures you control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. What this means is, as long as you have 5 mana, Bumi attacks, untaps all of your lands, and as long as you have 5 lands, boom, you get an additional combat step. It's another 1-card combo with our commander, and all you need to make it work is 5 lands. So again, I thought it was a little bit too disgusting, a little bit too easy. Put it in the sideboard, let you guys know about it. The next one is in the sideboard, not because I thought it was too broken, but just because it didn't work for my strategy, but I did want to share it with you guys in case any of you went for a heavy landfall strategy. This is a 6 CMC creature that has backup 1, meaning whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to put a 1/1 counter on a creature, and then that creature is going to gain this creature's ability until the end of turn. Really broken with extra combat steps, by the way. And then it says whenever this creature attacks, for each attacking modified creature you control, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature. Exile those tokens at the end of combat. So what's going to happen here is you're going to attack with all of your lands that are modified. You're going to get token copies of lands entering the battlefield, and that will trigger all of your landfall triggers. So it's a lot of triggers all at once, and it happens twice because our commander gives us an additional combat step. Absolutely broken. I mean, twice in the sense of the backup, right? But anyway, absolutely broken. If you have a landfall heavy deck that does still earthbend a lot, this is going to be what you want to put in your deck. With that being said, guys, thank you guys for watching the video. I really enjoyed this guy. Let me know what you guys think about this guy in the comments down below. And as always, I hope you guys have a great day.